it's Christy, and we're going to create something fun together today. I want to share with you a wonderful little wall piece idea for polymer clay and epoxy clay done in a mosaic assemblage style. Now, as many of you know, that happens to be one of my most favorite kind of techniques these days. I love combining the sculptural qualities of polymer clay and then the mosaic-y type of ways of putting things together with epoxy clay. It's just a wonderful mix of materials, and that's what we're going to play with today. Now, the theme of this is sort of the changing of autumn leaves. So I've got a tree, and the branches have leaves from green to yellows to orange to red, kind of fluttering off into the breeze. And I did this obviously because where we are in the year, it's turning from the end of summer into fall, northern hemisphere. Obviously, the southern hemisphere is going through something different at the moment, but I am reminded of just the fact about change. Like every year we go through these sort of major changes of seasons, but the most dramatic is going into the cold weather and then coming out of the cold weather. And that's what fall is all about. It's that transitional between the warmth and the abundance of summer into the cold and less abundance often of winter. But it represents that transitional change time. And there's a lot of changes going on besides just in the weather. And I thought it would be good to pause for a little bit and think about that. Think about change. How do we deal with that? And also to know it's a normal thing. That is what we go through, that nothing is ever the same as much as we may want it to be, or as eagerly as we await changes. That is always something that's happening. So it's always good to think about that from time to time. And that's what art does. It gives you sort of a visual point of reference to remind you of important things often. And maybe that will be this. So I'm hoping that you will enjoy this with me just on a purely artistic level. It gives us a chance to play with a lot of fun things, but it'll also kind of help you philosophically as well to embrace change and know that it is just an ever-going cycle of living. All right, so enough of philosophy. Grab some chocolate or an adult beverage or whatever your comfort food is to do a little bit of creativity together. We're going to have fun. So gather up your goodies and let's make. So sometimes what I do to start the ball rolling is to make a little sketch of what my idea is. Now, I may not stick to this idea, but it gives me a place to begin. So I thought I kind of wanted something lengthwise because I didn't want to emphasize the tree. I wanted to emphasize these leaves sort of changing in color and blowing away, since that was the theme. The change was more what I was interested in. So I'm envisioning kind of a little bit of a tree thing here and the leaves here. Now these I thought I would do very stylized, do them with polymer, and then all of the rest of the stuff with epoxy clay and mosaic assemblage. Anyway, so the first thing I thought was, let's gather up a bunch of scrap clays so that we can make the leaves. I was envisioning that the leaves close to the tree would be sort of green with a little yellow mixed in, and then they get to red, because that's the next color. Oftentimes things change, and yellow, the reds and the yellows, and then that final yellow one would be kind of blowing away. That was my thought. So these different color wads were what I thought would be good to use. I use scraps all the time. I have one big bucket where I kind of toss everything in. Sometimes I've got multiple buckets separated by rainbow colors, but at the moment they're all in one big wad, and I just kind of reach in and grab my greens and my oranges, my reds, that sort of thing, and then go from there. So I suggest that you go grab your scrap clay if you have them, and if not, then you just find some things that are yellows with maybe a hint of green in there, tiny touch of brown, of orange, and then some reds, but the reds also have some orange mixed in. You know the color scheme for fall. Anyway, find those clay combinations first, and now we're going to make a blend with them. So I'm going to start with my green blend, and I have mostly green, but as you can see, I had some little scrap dinosaur from when I was playing with my grandson. I had a little orange in it, and I had a bit of yellow. I thought that would make a good wad, and this is more than enough. This is probably twice the amount you need, but I'd rather have more than less because I use it all the time. And I'll start with this one, and the process is the same. Each one of the blends is going to be used separately. We're not mixing them all together. So I kind of squinch them together first, and then if you have a roller, it's kind of nice sometimes to flatten it out so you're not shoving it through your pasta machine. When you try to put something through your pasta machine in a big wad like this, you're going to, number one, it's just going to all kind of shred. because you're sticking a bowling ball in and all it can do is grab the little corner, so that's no good. And you're also going to, you know, put a lot of stress on the gears of your pasta machine. So this is what we're starting with, and now I'm going to put that in the machine. I'm using the second widest setting, and the first thing I want to do is just kind of flatten everything out, and then I usually sort of rip and stack this to start making the layers. And then I'm going to run it through one more time. Now, depending on how blendy your scraps are before you start, you may do this multiple times, but I'm going to cut it and look on the inside, and I'm seeing a lot of nice variance in there. So I'm just going to kind of cut and stack that right now and put this together and see what we have. So see, we've got some really nice greens in there. I think that will make a fun little leaf. And I only need to make one or two out of here, so I don't have to have a ton of this log. So I'm going to put the two together. Kind of, this is the space I'm going to use to cut. So I'm going to push it down and kind of press that together a little bit so everything is fun. And there I have something that I can make my little leaf shape out of. So I'm going to just get that on its side and try to cut a slice out of here. And like I said, I'm doing a stylized leaf. I often do realistic leaves, but today I'm in a stylized leaf mode. So I think that's going to be kind of a nice way to start. And I'm just going to use my roller to kind of make it all smashed out a little bit better. Now we can make our leaf just like this. Just cut it straight out of there. Or we can cut it on a diagonal like this, flip that around, and now you have the veins of a leaf, which might be more fun. And you can go ahead and put a little vein down the middle with some other clay if you want to, but I'm just going to cut this out into that sort of leafy shape. And you see what we have there? That's kind of nice. Now this is a little bit of regular there, but I'm going to finesse that with my hands, so I think we're okay here. So I've got my little lines going in both directions, a little hint of a line down the middle, which is enough for me. And I'm just going to start pressing this together, pinching, smoothing that edge so it's not quite so cookie cutter, and just gently play with it. And let's just see. I think that's looking pretty good so far. So now, let me take my needle tool, and I'm going to gently kind of press right down that center where that line was, because now I can just push that together, and that is a little bit more leafy. And the last part is just a bit of a twist to make the leaf really look realistic or have a little bit more life to it. It's that little teeny bit of tweaking that really makes it look fun. Pretty good so far, don't you think? So I suggest that as long as you have extra left, you might as well make a few more leaves. That way you've got choices when you go to the assemblage. So I'm going to make 2 or 3 more greens, and then I'm also going to create the same kind of leaves using yellow blend, orange blend, red blend, so that I have a nice little crop of leaves about this size in slightly different variations, so that I'm ready to just incorporate them into my piece. If you have kind of a small piece and you want it to be more, I have a little trick for you there. And that is to take your roller and spread it out. So I cut a kind of thick slice so that I could spread it a bit. And I do this with the roller, not in the pasta machine, just because I get a little bit more control. And see how that opens up all of the design as well. So you get a little bit more drama on your stripes as well, if you like. So let's see what we have. We have our red leaf. Here's an orange leaf. I did a couple yellow leaves and a couple green leaves. And then once you've got these done, then what I suggest is that you can leave them on the tile. It does make a little bit of a shiny side on the part that's touching the tile, but since we're going to embed these into the epoxy clay, that doesn't matter. So just bake them on the tile, follow the directions on your clay packaging, and you're good. Then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm kind of looking at my little guide here, and what I've done is I've used marker to kind of give myself sort of a border, an idea of where my tree might be, and then, just to remind me that the leaves are going to kind of fly away there. Then I have a silicone mat here, and this is awesome because I can put my little sketch right underneath this mat and see through it. Now, I got this at AV's, which is the people who make the epoxy sculpt, which is what I'm going to use. And I really love this one because it's see-through enough so that I can really kind of get an overall sense of it. Some of them are blue and different colors, and they're not as see-through, but if you have a light one, that can work well. The other thing that you can work on is a piece of plastic, like a page protector type plastic, something like that, or even those plastic cutting boards can work really well, and then they release very easily from the epoxy clay once it's dry. And you could also just even use some plastic wrap, although that's a little bit more flimsy, but you could make it work. You can kind of wrap it all around your space. Now, I have just a large tile that I use as my workspace, and that gives me a nice sturdy thing to be working on. So some kind of setup like this is ideal with a little bit of sketching to let you know where you're going to go. I've envisioned this to be big because I have a lot of kind of large elements that I wanted to possibly use in here, which is the next thing. Like I have some bits of driftwood and sea urchin shells that may be a part of this. I have a whole bunch of little deer antler niblets, so I can see maybe some of those being incorporated into the piece. I have some shell fragments from my wanderings. I'm thinking this could be interesting right here, this little cowrie shell innard. That might work out somewhere nicely. So I'm going to try to use some of these larger elements in this piece if it works. If not, then that's okay. But at least I want to kind of make this a little bit bigger with this in mind. So start to gather up your materials. Besides this, little stone chips or shards of pottery, you can make your own shards by accidentally dropping something. Put it in a Ziploc bag first so the pieces don't go everywhere. And then all kinds of tube beads and other kinds of crystals and bits and pieces, and just start assembling the things that you're going to use to start creating your mosaic. Okay, so I took a moment to sort of lay out the biggest elements of the design and trying to figure out sort of how I might want this to look using all my odds and ends. Now, you're not going to have the same things to play with that I have. So you're just going to have to take whatever you have and figure out how you want yours to look. And utilizing whatever you happen to have. The idea here is to use as many different things as you can to get the look you like. So I've got it kind of laid out. I decided that this leaf down here instead of up here was nicer. So I took a picture of it so I can remember where things are. But what I'm going to do is I have a larger tile, and I'm going to try and slip this underneath the paper and all of that stuff so I can just sort of keep everything how I had it and then take this away while I then prepare a new mat. Ta-da! And this is what I'll start putting the epoxy clay on, and that way I can start taking it directly from my sample pile and putting it back in the same spot. So you don't have to do it that way, but it's kind of a nice way to do it. Now what I'm going to use is epoxy sculpt. It's a two-part series, so you end up having a part A and a part B, and you mix them equally together. I'm going to use both black and white. I have larger containers like this because I use so much of it. I love it. And I'm going to make the tree itself, just the parts of the main parts of the tree with the black epoxy sculpt. I'm going to put it directly on to my silicone mat because it's a non-stick surface and build all that stuff up there. Then I can come back after the tree is done and go back and finesse the parts of the background as I'm ready to do it a piece at a time. But I'll go ahead and do the whole tree at once because they're fairly large elements, and it should go quickly enough because I have about an hour to an hour and a half working time once I mix the epoxy clays. After that, it starts getting a little too stiff and a little too hard to use. But there is one thing we have to do first just to make sure that this little guy, this piece of wood, will stick well into the clay, and that's to add a little screw to give there a metal component to the grab. So we're going to do that next. So the other thing that's very good to remember is you're going to want to take your little sketch, gently slide it out from your setup, and put it back underneath here so you have something to use as your guide for where you're going with this. Let's do the screw on here to help block it into place. Now I had it kind of like this, which I like, but as I'm looking at it, I kind of like this back side a little bit more. So I think I'm going to leave it this side. And I have these little teeny 1/4-inch screws. And I'm just going to insert one at some spot that is nice and thick. And this will allow the epoxy clay to really anchor onto the screw, because it's not going to, you see how these little bits of wood flake off? The epoxy clay will stick great to that. And then that whole piece kind of lifts off because it's not enough to hold it in there. So I'm going to get 2 screws here, because 2 is better than 1. And we'll just put that in here. And you're good. You can do this with polymer clay too if the piece is thicker. My leaves are thin, so we've got another way of preparing those for better attachment. Okay, there we go. So once you have 2 lumps that are about the same size and density and everything, then you're just going to mix them thoroughly together. And I do mean thoroughly. You don't have to rush with this because you have an hour to an hour and a half working time. And you notice how I'm like smushing it? That's to make sure there's no unblended pieces. If you can see any streaks of color, that subtle little gray inside the black, then you have not mixed it enough. You'll notice that I'm wearing gloves. I always recommend that you wear gloves when you're handling chemicals of any kind, obviously. But for this, look at how sticky this is when you're mixing it. You don't want that in your skin. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start shaping this to fill in the gaps here. And I've got a rough square outline, a rectangle that I'm going to keep things in. But I'm not going to be a fanatic about it. If stuff sort of goes outside of that parameter, it's okay. And you can see how thick this is. This is about this thick, about like this. I like that thickness because this is a big tree trunk. I don't mind it having a little bit of oomph to it. But it doesn't have to be that thick. It's not like it's necessary in order for it to work that it be that thick. That's not important. I just think that it can get away with it given the subject matter. But I am taking the time to kind of smooth and push out any areas that are too thick so that it's kind of a consistent thing going on. And don't worry about all the wrinkles and everything. That doesn't matter because those we're going to get covered by a lot of things, and anything that is still visible and awkward we can get rid of. Okay, so look everything over at this stage and see if the bones of the piece are pleasant. Now, when this comes, the rest of this comes for a square, I think this squared off part up here is not going to look too awkward once everything else gets where it's supposed to, so that's good. Okay, so now we're going to start assembling. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first kind of lightly place things where I have remembered them so I can see where the gaps are and what needs to be done. All right, now I'm finding there's a few larger gaps in here from what I was imagining. So now I can find a few more pieces that will fill in some of these larger gaps. So as you insert these into the epoxy clay, what you want to do is you want to make sure that they're pressed in well enough to grab, all right? Because everything, if it's just gently resting on the surface, that's not going to be enough. You need to really push that in there and make sure that the clay is really grabbing each piece. So that's what I'm doing right now. Now, on some things like this, you see this wonderful little raccoon heart. Thanks, Lila. It's got a little hole in it because it was made as a pendant. And I'm going to steal a little teeny bit of epoxy clay from a little corner here, and I'm going to put it in that hole and add a little something. So if you've got, if you've got things that you want to use that are like that, but they've got a hole or something like that, don't let it bother you. You can just add something right there. Okay, I have a few more things. I've got a little mini tile here that I think would look really lovely on top of that heart. So let's tuck that in right there. And there's a little bit of epoxy clay gushing out around the side, so I'm just going to trim it. And that should be just fine. Plenty to hold it in place there. And I have a little bit if I need it for something else. Make sure you both clean your fingers and your tools with a wet wipe as you go along. Now I've got a couple of other things. I'm looking at this, and though I like the shape and texture of this, it's a little too low for that spot right there. This is a cowrie shell that I found. So let's see if I can, do I like it in this space here? Possibly. Might just be too low there as well. How about up here? That fills in that space nicely. And then I have this neat little piece of opal. See, it's got a little vein of opal in there, but it has that sort of wooden look to it as well. So I'm going to put that there instead. I can put another spiral right next to that one. Reminiscent of sort of like a knot hole. All right, that works. This is my favorite part, where you just start, puzzle piecing in missing bits, just to try and make everything fit nicely. That could go in there, but it might look better over here. And this will all depend on what materials you have. And I purposely, in this one, picked materials that I knew were quite unique and that you might not have the same thing. And that wasn't to get you frustrated or whatever. It was just to help you realize that it's very personal. It all just depends on what you have in your stash and what you can use, because everything is okay. You might not have anything like this, but you might break up a plate and just use all of those little bits and pieces. Or you may decide to make your whole tree thing out of polymer and just do the background with a mosaic using some beads or something. So it's really completely up to you how you want to do it. I just want to give you a few ideas that maybe you didn't think about. Now I've got these wonderful coconut beads. They're kind of funky, and I like putting them on edge sometimes because that just looks kind of neat, I think. And obviously because they're wood, they go in great with this little theme. And we have here. So now I'm just filling in gaps. And then I have my tube beads. We're going to bring those in at the end and see if we can't get all of the gaps finished. So let's just play. This part here is kind of hollow underneath, so I'm going to actually tuck this extra clay right underneath that part of the shell just to give it some more support and strength there. And I like this edge, so I am going to trim away some of that right there. And some of this here. Your background's going to come right up to it, so it doesn't have to be like super great. You know, just get the clumps out of the way. Smooth it up a little bit so it's not too messy. And then that background will take care of the rest when we get to that part. This is another thing you can do too besides cutting it away. If you want a little extra support, which this could use, I'm just sort of shoving it up and under in that area that needed a little extra support. Okay, I also have some tube beads, some kind of silvery brown, golden brown tube beads, and I've taped off one end so it doesn't get away from me. And I'm holding it with tweezers on the other to make sure that it's nice and strong. And I might just run some of this around this outside edge here. Actually, why don't I start it over here? So hold it a little bit better there. And I'm holding it still because if I loosen it, then it's going to loosen all along this tube bead area. And then they get a lot of gaps in them. So I'm holding it until I get everything sort of in place where I want it. And then I can pull that out of the way. And then make sure each individual bead is pressed in tightly. This can help to find edges. That's one reason why I didn't take it all off on this spot, as I kind of wanted to put a little bit of that there. And I'm going to put a second runner. Try to offset it a little bit so that they're not exactly lined up. It looks a little nicer, you know, kind of like bricks, where you kind of have one starting in the middle of where the other one was. I think that looks nice. All right, so that looks nice. That edge looks nice now, and there's a little extra gush there. We can take that out. And as we come over here, I'll take a little of that away. We still want to put something right in there. Now, since I did a little bit of that there, I'm kind of thinking it would also look nice to repeat the process. Maybe it could be right here, or it could be out here. I'm inclined to go over here just because I feel like it. I'm going to take a few of these kind of brownish color beads and put them straight in this way. All right, what do you think about back here? Clean it up or put something back there? I like how these are just the way they are, and then this is a different look. So I feel like if I put this back there, that'll add too much like little border, and I kind of like that it's rough looking. So let's just take this away. I kept it there just in case I wanted to add something back there, but I think I like it just with those sea urchin spines hanging out. Okay, so now all I'm seeing is a little bit of stuff right up here and a few gaps to fill in this tree trunk area. Are you with me? All right, what do you think? I think now we have this whole sort of tree assemblage. Everything ties together. I've kept all similar colors with the brown grays and the little hints of greenish, that kind of color. And then we're going to be ready to start adding our leaves and the background and all that stuff next. Okay, so here's the finished tree, and I've positioned the leaves how I'm sort of envisioning them to look. And I took a picture again so that I will know how I thought about making them. And now I'm going to put them off to the side because we're going to add them later. And I lifted this up and added some of these lines to my original drawing. This is sort of the way the breeze is going to go. So I want to make sure I'm able to line up my lines of beads along these breeze lines, which I think is helpful. So it's nice, again, to have this sort of see-through sheet so that we can put other little key bits on it to keep ourselves centered in the design we're going to go. And now I'm going to use white for the background. Now I thought quite a lot about what color I wanted the rest of this to be, because it could go in a couple of different directions. I looked at light blue, I looked at whites, etc. But I kind of settled for this because I have a big bucket of all these kind of metallic blues. And I really liked the contrast with this, and it picks up some of the colors in here too, but the contrast is nice. There's a lot of different shapes that I have in this bucket. And I just kind of felt like this was sort of that steely gray that sometimes those autumn and wintry days get. I don't know, we'll see, but I think that looks nice. Now, this could look nice with a black epoxy clay behind it, or white. I'm going to try white and just see. I'll use some powders then to get in between any, like where the white's showing up more than I want. But we're just going to give it a shot. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to mix enough to kind of fill in this spot only. Because I don't know how long it's going to take me to place everything that I want, and I want to have plenty of time to work on this without panicking and having to hurry. So I'm just going to do a section, a section, a section, and then we'll add the other sections, all right? Gloves on, and I'm going to mix my white epoxy. Mix, I'm going to just put a little aside in case I need it for stuff. And I'm going to start making this roughly into that shape by flattening it out. Same sort of thickness, maybe a little thinner than the tree. And what I want to do is I want to kind of shove this right up against the tree trunk, right? So that it kind of goes right into the gap of it without covering over anything. And I'll use my tool to finesse that a little bit more in a minute. And I want to keep it straight along that bottom. And I'm going to follow that kind of curve of the breeze that I established there. And I'll go over it a little bit more in a minute. Now I'm also paying attention to my line here because I took the time to kind of draw that fairly straight. I used a tile as a reference, and it's a fairly straight rectangle, and that's important because it's very easy if you get your square, your rectangle misshapen, then that's what you're going to see. You're going to see like, oh, that's not straight. And I have trouble with straight lines, so I know this to be a thing. So it's really good to make sure you try to line up your tree again here. Make sure this is here and that you're following those lines. And I tried to line it up so that this was equal here to that line so that I could kind of have that as a little view as well. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over that little line I drew and flatten this edge down. And the reason is then I can make my next layer just come right up and over it without it like butting up into this blobby bit, because this will be nice and thin and spread out more than is necessary. Going to keep it nice here because that's my corner, but something like that would be good. Now I'm just sort of pressing it all over to make sure that it's nice and evenly thick, more or less. All right, gloves can come off. I want to take a tool and make sure that this is pressed up to but not over the details. Now, there might be gaps and stuff on the back. When this is all done, we can just add a little bit of epoxy clay once it's all done and dry to the back to fill in any areas that didn't quite, join together or something. So I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. Now, I want to go ahead and give myself this line again. So I had this coming down here, and then it was just sort of kind of like that. All right, so that gives me that kind of a flow there. Now, we got a couple of different things that we could do here. What might be nice is just to go ahead and create a lovely texture here. So I'm going to take a bigger tool so that I can come here and just sort of drag and follow those lines. Now, Now let's begin to bead. So the first thing I'd like to start with is I have quite a number of these larger tube beads, and I find that they are a wonderful way to establish lines, flow, drama, that kind of thing. So I'm going to just sort of make those, and I don't want it to be 100% those because that can look a little off-putting. So I'll put a couple of different looking beads in between, but it'll be mostly these. So you can see why I sort of picked this color. I had a lot in this color range and a lot of variety. So, you know, you can do whatever you like. You could pick all one bead. It could all just be white beads. That could look amazing. And once in a while I like putting something on edge like that. Again, it sort of breaks that up. And right now that's a pretty straight line, but I'm going to up curve it a little bit at the end. In fact, I'm going to push this up just a bit more so I can make that up curve a little bit more dramatic. So I take the time to make this line especially well placed because everything else is going to follow along that line. Okay, so it's got a little upturn there, which is good. Okay, now once I've got that in place, I'm going to come back and on the other side of this make a little bit of that texture as well. That way, if I don't put my next piece of epoxy clay right smack up to those beads, it'll have like a natural flow to it. Okay, so now I'm just going to start emphasizing that line, maybe put a couple more going in that direction. So now what I think I'm going to try to do is I'm going to start filling this in, but leaving a little bit of gaps showing. But I'm still following the curve that I've established. One of the ways is to do sort of like a dotted line. So you're doing the line still, but there's space in between. That is a good transitional effect. Now I think I'm going to put maybe just a couple pieces that are deliberately crooked, just to see how that looks. Kind of break it up just a little bit. Okay, so I have a few little scattered arounds. So overall, we've got this sense of swooping, and we'll just keep on going. Now, this decision what I have to make right now is, this is one section done. Do I want to add a color of powder? Because now is the time. And I feel like I do. Like, this is a nice background color, but it's a little harsh. Contrast between the blue and the white. So I'm going to grab a powder and just add it in between, and let's see how that looks. I like to use Pan Pastel. I think that's the best powder to use in this situation because it's really, really grabby. And I'm going for kind of a turquoise color, again, sort of sky. Let's see how that looks in the in-between. See how that kind of helps everything look a little bit more consistent. There's a nicer flow there. Doesn't that look a lot better here than here? So funny thing about this stuff is it doesn't look good until it does. And how do you know? How do you know what you should add to make the next thing to make it look good? Practice. You may mess up some, and that's okay. You know, it's all part of the learning. And a lot of times when you mess up something, sometimes you immediately think of a way to fix it, and other times you just don't. So don't get frustrated if you can help it. You know, go get some ice cream and calm down. And then just leave it, you know, sort of not right in your eye line, but somewhere where you can kind of see it, because your brain will be trying to solve the problem. It will be trying to figure out what it can do to fix the situation. Now I'm going to go for a little lighter color. And eventually you'll have this epiphany of like, oh, wait, now I know what I could do. And you'll try it, and it'll either work or it won't. And that's kind of how that works often, which is good. It's nice, because sometimes it just takes time till you know what works. All right, so I did like a little gradient here, a little dark around the tree, and then lighter to the outer edges. I think that works nicely. Now, the thing about this is, I'm going to blow it. So you see how this sort of sticks on top of the beads, and you lose a lot of that initially, that shine. But you want to kind of put it on there. In fact, sometimes I'll even go down like this to make sure that it's really stuck into the epoxy clay, depending on how sticky it is. The drier it gets, the more you have to do that. And we're not going to put anything here right now. Well, actually, let me put just a little, because that other powders, other epoxy clay is going to come right to that edge. But just in case there's a gap, let's get this in here while we can. But then once it's all done and dry, then you can use like a little nice clean brush and sweep over the top, and then a little bit of a wet wipe, and get rid of any extra stuff that's blocking all the shine, and then it'll all pop again. All right, one section is done. Okay, I gloved up and mixed up some more white, because I'm going to do this strip here and in this little corner here. So let's get this going, and I might have enough clay mixed up to do even more, but let's just try this first. I'll get this little corner too. Okay, so now I can take the gloves off and start smoothing this into place. And it's a little thick. Sometimes it gets little air bubbles in there. You can just kind of pop and push. And I'm going to go ahead and push it up a little more. No sense in wasting it. We'll be able to do a little bit more than we thought there. Okay, so all of that's on. Now let's use our big tool to do that scraping texture like we had. Okay, so now I'm just going to sort of repeat the same idea in here. I want to start with a continuation of that line here, so I can tell where I'm going. All right, so now I'm going to make another little line here, so I can see where I'm going. I really want sort of an upturn, so bring that there. Okay, so now I've got this curving that way and this here. Now it's just filling it in the same way as we've done before. I have a couple of these. I just realized these kind of fun round in that same tone. I might use a few of those here and there. I'm going to do something a little bit different since I found this little round bead. I'm going to make just a little eddy here where it swirls around. Something a little different. Okay, so here's a bunch of little swirls and things here. I think that's looking pretty good. So now we're going to tackle the rest of this here, and then we can put our powders on. Okay, this section is done and ready for powders. And I'm going to do the same thing and keep it darker up here and then lighter as we go. So I'll start with this. And of course, look how fun these things will be up against that color. Nice, huh? Okay, we just have this little bit to do up here. All right, last little bit to do, and then the leaves. So I some of these little round elements. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you know that 5 is always better. So I'm going to put one more kind of up there. I think that helps that look a little bit better. And now it's just more of the same. We're just going to start filling it in with the rest of the same kind of beaded elements to make a consistency for the rest of this. Shall we do it? Yes, let's shall. Okay, I think that's as done as I want to be up there. I still have plenty of clay left to add the leaves, which we're going to do next. Let's get the powder on. Okay, so now we're going to put our leaves on. And I was aware as I was going along of sort of where my leaves were going to go, but I also wanted just this to look nice. So I didn't really care too much if I got stuff in a spot that would maybe make me rethink where I put my leaves. But for now, I'm going to just start adding where I thought I would like them to go. So originally, this one was kind of floating down here, which I'm going to put it there for the moment and we'll see. And then we had our green one kind of up here. And then we had some yellows. And I think we had an orange kind of coming out this direction. That one wasn't exactly where it was, so something like that. Now I think this one had a little different placement, but I kind of like it. Do I? Or do I want it back up here where it was originally? Now to put these on, polymer is not grabby with epoxy clay. It's a plastic, and epoxy clay is fond of most things, but plastic, not as much. So we have a little workaround. I use a super glue, and I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on the bottom, and I'm using Lisa Pavelka's Poly Bonder because it's got this great little nail brush application, which applicator, which I love. So I'm going to go to the area where the attachment's going to be, put a little bit of super glue on, and you can let it dry or you can work on it wet. I tend to work on it wet, just because I'm doing it as I'm placing things. So I'm just going to put the epoxy clay like right on top of that super glue and press down. The reason is the super glue grabs the epoxy clay fairly well, and then of course the epoxy clay likes the super glue. I'm sorry, the super glue grabs the polymer. I don't know what I said. The super glue grabs the polymer, the epoxy clay grabs the super glue, everybody's happy. So this lived right over here, and I want to make sure that there are non-powder covered items for it to grab onto, which I think we're okay there. So we're just going to press that into place. I don't think there's any of that epoxy clay sticking out the backside, so we're good. Then I'll work on just as I go along, you know, one after the other, finding the spot where it's going to attach and adding the glue. All right. Okay, so look it all over. Feel if you like the proportion. Does everything look like it's where it ought to be? Do you need to change anything? I think overall, that's a pretty good layout, don't you think? Okay, so I'm just going to just look behind, and if there's any of the epoxy clay visible, blobbing out from behind, I'm just touching it with some powder just to make sure it's not visible. It just blends into the background. So there's only two where that happened. Okay, so now what do? We let that completely dry. I did it in stages, so this area dried one day, and then this is now going to dry the next day. When it's all completely dry, it will peel off of its non-stick surface. While it's sticky, it really grabs onto it, but once it's dry, you can just peel it right off the back. Then I would say put a towel or some bubble wrap down, gently flip it over, see if there's any gaps. Sometimes where you're putting one layer and then another layer, there's a little visible line there. You may want to mix up a bit more epoxy clay and just firm in any areas that look like they have sort of structural weakness, just to kind of give it a little bit more strength. And then it's time to put the hangers on. I would just use some 20 gauge wire. Just snip off a little bit of it, bend it, and add little feet. Little feet just helps it anchor a little bit more nicely in the back. And then you just take your little blob of epoxy clay and you put a blob completely covering each of the legs, like this. So then you know it's really embedded in there nicely, and then you just press it onto the back. And I would put one on the back side here and one on the back side there, and that will give 2 sturdy hangers, which I think is better on a piece like this. You don't want to try and balance it in the middle all crazy. The other option that you could have is you could take a picture frame and have just the frame with the glass and put some more epoxy clay on the back and press it right on the glass, or a wooden canvas, or a piece of driftwood, or whatever, well, like not driftwood, but like a plank, that kind of thing. Something like that would make a wonderful way of mounting it as well. And also now is a good time just to double check, make sure that everything here looks straight and square. I'm kind of seeing that this is down a little bit more. I might add just a touch up here. I might leave it, but you want it to look proportionately nice. You don't want your eye to go, oh, wow, that angle's way off, because that's always awkward when you look at it, then you realize, oh, I didn't do it right. But if you get it all done and you notice something like that, epoxy clay is so easy. You just mix up a little bit more, add a little bit. You know how to blend it now and make it look like it belongs with everything else. Boom, done. Easy peasy. All right, so let it air dry. Takes 24 hours to air dry. Then brush off and wet wipe off any of the excess powder that's on your beads. Sit back and admire your wonderful creation. You did great.